Rep Radio Theater, a monthly program of dramatic literature with Trinity Rep's resident acting company, produced by Trinity Rep and WRNI. I'm your host, Bob C., and joining me is Kurt Columbus, Trinity Rep's artistic director, and four members of the resident acting company, Janice Duclos, Stephen Berenson, Stephen Thorne, and Rachel Warren. Welcome, everyone. This holiday program is being recorded before a live audience gathered here at Trinity Rep in Providence, and to prove it to you, here they are. All right, ready to listen. Kurt, tell us about tonight's program.
Well, Bob, it's a very exciting evening for us. We wanted to choose stories as a bit of a holiday gift for our audience, and we do this every year. There's always an embarrassment of riches, a wealth of material about holiday time and what it means to us and how it can transform our lives. But we've picked three stories this year, one by Ray Bradbury, who is a writer we've returned to many times on this program, another by Ron Carlson, and a third by Sean O'Phelan. We hope that they're new to our listeners, but they definitely capture the holiday spirit in all of them. And we're going to start with one called The H Street Sledding Record. It was written in 1987 by Ron Carlson. It's set in Salt Lake City, and Carlson grew up in Salt Lake. He's also the director of the creative writing program at UC Irvine and the author of several novels. His short stories have been much anthologized, and I think you'll see why when you hear this one. And they've been published in The New Yorker and Esquire, Harper's, and Playboy, and he's a remarkable, remarkable writer. We're glad to present this story.
Let's hear The H Street Sledding Record, featuring Stephen Thorne, Rachel Warren, and Janice Duclos, here on Trinity Rep Radio Theater.
The last thing I do every Christmas Eve is go out in the yard and throw the horse manure onto the roof. It is a ritual. After we return from making our attempt at the H Street Sledding Record, and we sit in the kitchen sipping eggnog and listening to Elise recount the sled ride, and Elise then finally goes to bed, happily, reluctantly, I go into the garage and put on the gloves and then into the yard where I throw the horse manure on the roof. Drew always uses this occasion to call my mother. They exchange all the Christmas news, but the main purpose of the calls the last few years has been for Drew to stand in the window where she can see me out there, lobbing the great turds up into the snow on the roof, and describe what I am doing to my mother. The two women take amusement from this. They say things like, "You married him," and "He's your son." I take their responses to my rituals as a kind of fond, subtle support, which it is. Drew first discovered me throwing the manure on the roof the Christmas that Elise was 4.
You're the only man I've ever known who did that.
See? A compliment. But now that Elise is 8, Drew has become cautious.
You're fostering her fantasies.
Kids grow up too soon these days.
Oh, what do you want her to do? Come home from school in tears when she's 15? Some kid in her class will have said, "Oh, sure, Santa's reindeer took a dump on your roof, eh?"
Some kid in her class? Fine, I don't care what he says. I'm her father. I have thrown horse manure on our roof for 4 years now, and I plan to do it every Christmas Eve until my arm gives out.
You want to create evidence? Let's put out milk and a cookie, and then drink the milk and eat a bite out of the cookie.
Drew, I don't like cookies. I never ate a dessert in my life. I put a brake on the sled in 1975 when Drew was pregnant with Elise, so we could still make our annual attempt on the H Street Sledding Record on Christmas Eve. It was the handle of a broken Louisville Slugger baseball bat and still had the precise 34 stamped into the bottom. I sawed it off square and drilled and bolted it to the rear of the sled so that when I pulled back on it, the stump would drag us to a stop. As it turned out, it was one of the 2 years when there was no snow. So we walked up to 11th Avenue and H Street, as we promised, rain or shine, sat on the flexible flyer in the middle of the dry street on a starry Christmas Eve, and I held her in my lap. We sat on the sled like two basketball players contesting possession of her belly. We talked a little about what it would be like when she took her leave from the firm and I had her home all day with the baby, and we talked remotely about whether we wanted any more babies, and we talked about the record. which was set on December 24th, 1969, the first Christmas of our marriage, when we lived in the neighborhood on Fifth Avenue in an old barn of a house, the total rent of which was $72.50. Honest. And Drew had given me the sled that very night, and we had walked out about midnight and been surprised by the blizzard. We took the sled and walked around the corner up H Street, up to 11th Avenue, without speaking or knowing what we were doing. Opened the door on the second ritual of our marriage, the annual sled ride. The first ritual was the word condition and the activities it engendered in our droopy old bed. At the top, we scanned the city blurred in snow, sat on my brand new Christmas sled, and set off. The sled rode high and effortlessly through the deep snow, and suddenly, as our hearts started and our eyes began to burn against the snowy air, we were going faster than we'd planned. We crossed 10th Avenue, nearly taking flight in the dip, and then descended in a dark rush. 9th, 8th, 7th, soaring across each avenue. My arms wrapped around Drew like a straitjacket to drag her off with me if a car should cross in front of us on 6th, 5th Avenue, 4th. This all took seconds, do you see? Until a car did turn onto H Street, headed our way, and we veered the new sled sharply up over the curb, dousing our speed in the snowy yard, one house from the corner of 3rd Avenue. Drew took a real face full of snow, which she squirmed around and pressed into my neck.
Now that's a record.
And it was the record, 11th to 3rd. And it stood partly because there had been 2 Christmas Eves with no snow, partly because of assorted spills brought on by too much speed, too much laughter, sometimes too much caution, and by a light blue Mercedes that crossed 6th Avenue just in front of us in 1973. And though some years were flops, there was nothing about Christmas that Elise looked forward to as much as our one annual attempt at the H Street sledding record. I think Drew wants another baby. I'm not sure, but I think she wants another child. The signs are so subtle they barely seem to add up, but she says things like,
Remember before Elise went to school?
and?
There sure are a lot of women in their mid-30s having babies.
I should ask her, but for some reason I don't. We talk about everything, but I've avoided this topic. I've avoided talking to Drew about this topic because I want another child too badly to have her not want one. I want a little boy to come into the yard on Christmas morning and say, "See there on the roof, the reindeers were there." I want another kid to throw horse manure for. I'll wait. It will come up one of these days. I'll find a way to bring it up. Christmas is coming. On the first Friday night in December, every year, Elise and Drew and I go by our tree. This, too, is ritual. Like those families that bundle up and head for the wilderness so they can trudge through the deep, pristine snow, chop down their own little tree and drag it step by step all the way home, we venture forth in the same spirit. Only we take the old pickup down to South State and find some joker who has thrown up 2 strings of colored lights around the corner of the parking lot of a burned-out Safeway and is proffering trees to the general public. There is something magical and sad about this little forest just sprung up across from City Tacos. And Drew and Elise and I wander the wooded paths, waiting for some lopsided pinion to leap into our hearts. The winter Drew and I became serious when I was a senior and she was already in her first year at law school. I sold Christmas trees during vacation. Drew's mother invited me to stay with them for the holidays, and it gave me the chance to help Drew make up her mind about me. I would sell trees until midnight and then drive back to Drew's and watch every old movie in the world and wrestle with Drew until our faces were mashed blue. I wanted to complicate things wonderfully by having her sleep with me. She wanted to keep the couch cushions between us and think it over. It was a crazy Christmas. We'd steam up the windows in the entire living room, but she never gave in. We did develop the joke about the condition, which we still use as a code word for desire. And later, I won't say if it was spring or fall, when Drew said to me, "I'd like to see you about this condition," I knew everything was going to be all right and that we'd spend every Christmas together for the rest of our lives. Elise has selected a short, broad bush which seems to have grown in 2 directions at once and then given up.
How do you like it? If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Besides, I've already decided this is the tree for us. Oh, it's a beautiful tree.
This tree's name is Quasimodo.
No whispering. What's he saying now, Mom? He says he likes the tree, too. Dad, it's Christmas. Behave yourself.
When we go to pay for the tree, the master of ceremonies is busy negotiating a deal with 2 kids, a punk couple. The tree man stands with his hands in his change apron.
I gotta get $35 for that tree.
The boy, a skinny kid in a leather jacket, shrugs and says he's only got $28. His girlfriend, a large person with a bowl haircut and a monstrous black overcoat festooned with buttons, is wailing.
Please! Oh, no! Jimmy! Jimmy! I love that tree! I want that tree!
The tree itself stands aside, a noble pine of about 12 feet. Unless these kids live in a gymnasium, they're buying a tree bigger than their needs. Jimmy retreats to his car, an old Plymouth as big as a boat. Police rule is spray-painted across both doors in balloon letters. He returns instantly and opens a handful of coins.
I'll give you $31, 55 cents, and my watch.
To our surprise, the wily tree man takes the watch to examine it. When I see that, I give Elise $4 and tell her to give it to Kid Jimmy and say, Merry Christmas. His girlfriend is still wailing. I haven't seen a public display of emotion and longing of this magnitude in Salt Lake City ever. I watch Elise give the boy the money, but instead of saying Merry Christmas...
Here, Jimmy. Santa says keep your watch.
Jimmy pays for the tree, and his girl, and this is the truth, jumps on him, wrestles him to the ground in gratitude, and smothers him for nearly a minute.
Oh, Jimmy! Jimmy! Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
There have never been people happier about a Christmas tree. We pay quickly and head out before Jimmy or his girlfriend can think to begin thanking us. On the way home in the truck, I say to Elise, Santa says keep your watch, huh?
Yes, he does.
How old are you anyway?
8. When he was your age, he was 7.
It's an old joke. On the morning of the 24th of December, Elise comes into our bedroom, already dressed for sledding.
Good news, we've got a shot at the record.
Drew rises from the pillow and peeks out of the blind.
Oh, it's snowing.
Christmas Eve. We drive back along the snowy avenues and park on 5th, as always. Elise hops out of the car.
I know. You two used to live right over there before you had me, and it was a swell place and only cost $72.50 a month, honest.
Drew looks at me and smiles. I ask Elise, how old are you? But she's busy towing the sled away around the corner, up toward 11th Avenue. It is still snowing. Petal flakes, teeming by the street lamps, trying to carry the world away. I take Drew's hand and we walk up the middle of H Street behind our daughter. There is no traffic, but the few cars have packed the tender snow perfectly. It could be a record. On 9th Avenue, Drew stops me in the intersection. The world still is snow and kisses me.
I love you.
What a planet to allow such a thing. By the time we climb to 11th Avenue, Elise is seated on the sled, ready to go.
What are you guys waiting for, Christmas?
That's funny. That's very funny.
No, listen, Dad. I figure if you just stay a little to the left of the tire tracks, we could go all the way and no wobbling.
She's referring to last year's record attempt, which was extinguished in the 8th Avenue block when we laughed ourselves into a fatal wobble and ended in a slush heap. We arrange ourselves on the sled as we have each Christmas Eve for 8 years. As I reach my long legs around these two women, I sense their excitement. Elise whispers into the whispering snow.
It's going to be a record. Do you think so? Oh, yeah. The conditions are perfect. What do you think?
Well, the conditions are perfect. When I say conditions, Drew leans back and kisses me. There's still room on the sled. I point to the F in the flexible flyer that is visible between Elise's legs. There's still room for another person.
Who? Your little brother.
Drew squeezes my knees. And that's about all that was said. Sitting up there on 11th Avenue on Christmas Eve, on a sled which is as old as my marriage, with a brake that is as old as my daughter. Later tonight, I will stand in my yard and throw this year's reindeer droppings on my very own home. I love Christmas. Now the snow spirals around us softly. I put my arms around my family and lift my feet onto the steering bar. We begin to slip down H Street. We are trying for the record. The conditions, as you know by now, are perfect.
We've been listening to the H Street sledding record with Stephen Thorne, Rachel Warren, and Janice Duclos here on Trinity Rep Radio Theater, recording live on location here at Trinity Rep Theater in Providence. What a beautiful story.
We've been trying to do this story now for a couple of years, Bob. It's been in our quiver, as we like to say, and it's one of my favorites for its simplicity and the way that it talks about the traditions that we have, that we develop for ourselves around Christmas, right?
We all have our personal family rituals, I guess. And
right.
I know that one in my family was to go out and find the tree, and we always had to find one of the worst-looking trees so that we could make it look really good.
Huh.
That was our ritual.
Did it work?
Absolutely.
The magic. No, we've been talking about the traditions that we have in our families as a result of this story. Mm. We were also talking about the sledding thing, right, Stephen Thorne?
Yes. And I was remembering I grew up in a pretty small town, and we actually didn't get a lot of snow. It was in Oregon, and every now and then we got enough to go sledding, and there was one particular hill in the town, and I can't for the life of me remember the name of the street, but I remember the Savages, the Savage family, although they were not savage, they were very nice. They lived right up at the top, and it was a scary steep hill, and you can't really control your sled all that much. There's this idea of steering your sled. I think that's bogus. You just kind of go down the thing. But I remember there were a few Christmases. Christmases where we were doing some sledding up there.
Yeah.
And I'm still alive to tell the tale. So.
Well, I grew up in Kansas, born and raised, and so we had nothing exotic as the hills of Oregon. But I actually learned on NPR, I think in the last year, there was a program about somebody actually did a study to see if Kansas was as flat as a pancake. It's actually flatter because pancakes have little bubbles in them. I learned these things, Joe. But so we didn't have hills. I mean, it was pathetic for sledding. But my dad used to do this thing, which is you never try this, but he would get out the tractor and tie us behind the, not us, but the sled, and pull us through the snow around the field, like around and around and around and around. So that was a thrill.
Well, and this is, Bob, this is actually one of the things that we were talking about, and a good segue into our next story, this notion that our memories of Christmas or our memories of ourselves in that past is as important as Christmas present, which is the segue into our next story. If you don't mind, we're going to move on. It's a 1984 story by Ray Bradbury. Now, Bradbury's, of course, best known for his science fiction, but every time we do him on this program, we find that there's as much human fact as there is science fiction in the stories. This one is called Bless Me, Father, for I Have Sinned.
Bless Me, Father, for I Have Sinned by Ray Bradbury, read by Stephen Berenson, Stephen Thorne, and Rachel Warren here on Trinity Rep Radio Theater.
It was just before midnight on Christmas Eve when Father Mellon woke, having slept for only a few minutes. He had a most peculiar urge to rise, go, and swing wide the front door of his church to let the snow in, and then go sit in the confessional to wait. Wait for what? Who could say? Who might tell? But the urge was so incredibly strong it was not to be denied. He muttered quietly to himself as he dressed.
What's going on here? I am going mad, am I not? At this hour? Who could possibly want or need, and why in blazes should I...
But dress he did, and down he went, and opened wide the front door of the church, and stood in awe of the great artwork beyond. better than any painting in history, a tapestry of snow weaving in laces and gentling to roofs and shadowing the lamps and putting shawls on the huddled masses of cars waiting to be blessed at the curb. The snow touched the pavements, and then his eyelids, and then his heart. He found himself holding his breath with the fickle beauties, and then turning, the snow following at his back, he went to hide in the confessional.
Damn fool. Stupid old man. Out of here. Back to your bed.
But then he heard it. A sound at the door, and footsteps scraping on the paved stones of the church, and at last the damp rustle of some invader fresh to the other side of the confessional. Father Mellon waited.
Bless me, for I have sinned.
How could you know the church would be open and I here?
I prayed, Father. God made you come open up.
There seemed no answer to this, so the old priest and what sounded like a hoarse old sinner sat for a long, cold moment as the clock itched on toward midnight, and at last the refugee from darkness repeated,
Bless this sinner, Father.
But in place of the usual unguents and ointments of words, with Christmas hurrying fast through the snow, Father Mellon leaned toward the lattice window and could not help saying,
It must be a terrible load of sin you carry to have driven you out on such a night, on an impossible mission that turned possible only because God heard and pushed me out of bed.
It is a terrible list, Father, as you will find.
Then speak, son, before we both freeze.
Well, it was this way. 60 years back.
Speak up. 60? That long past.
60.
And there was a tormented silence. Ashamed of interrupting, the priest said,
Go on.
60 years this week when I was 12, I Christmas shopped with my grandmother in a small town back east. We walked both ways. In those days, who had a car? We walked, and coming home with the wrapped gifts, my grandma said something. I've long since forgotten what. And I got mad and ran ahead, away from her. Far off, I could hear her call and then cry terribly for me to come back. But I wouldn't. She wailed so I knew I had hurt her, which made me feel strong and good. So I ran even more, laughing, and beat her to the house, and when she came in, she was gasping and weeping as if never to stop. I felt ashamed and ran to hide.
Is that it?
The list is long.
Continue.
I did much the same to my mother before New Year's. She angered me. I ran. I heard her cry out behind me. I smiled and ran faster. Why? Why, oh God, why?
The priest had no answer. He felt strangely moved toward the old man beyond.
Is that it, then?
One summer day, some bullies beat me. When they were gone, on a bush I saw 2 butterflies, embraced, lovely. I hated their happiness. I grabbed them in my fist and pulverized them to dust. Oh, Father, the shame.
The wind blew in the church door at that moment, and both of them glanced up to see a Christmas ghost of snow turned about in the door and falling away in drifts of whiteness to scatter on the pavings.
There's one last terrible thing. When I was 13, again in Christmas week, my dog Bo ran away and was lost 3 days and nights. I loved him more than life itself. He was special and loving and fine, and all of a sudden the beast was gone and all his beauty with him. I waited, I cried, I waited, I prayed, I shouted under my breath. I knew he would never, never come back. And then, that Christmas Eve at 2 a.m, with sleet on the pavements and icicles on roofs and snow falling, I heard a sound in my sleep and woke to hear him scratching the door. I bounded from bed so fast I almost killed myself. I yanked the door open, and there was my miserable dog, shivering, excited, covered with dirty slush. I yelled and pulled him in, slammed the door, fell to my knees, grabbed him, and wept. What a gift! What a gift! I called his name over and over, and he wept with me, all whines and glories and agonies of joy. And then I stopped. Do you know what I did then? Can you guess the terrible thing? I beat him. Yes, beat him. With my fists, my hands, my palms, and my fists again, crying, "How dare you leave? How dare you run off? How dare you do that to me? How dare you? How dare?" And I beat and beat until I was weak and sobbed and had to stop, for I saw what I'd done. And he just stood there and took it all as if he knew he deserved it. He had failed my love, and now I was failing his. And I pulled off, and tears streamed from my eyes. My breath strangled, and I grabbed him again and crushed him to me, but this time cried, "Forgive. Oh, please, Bo, forgive. I didn't mean it. Oh, Bo, forgive." But, oh, Father, he couldn't forgive me. Who was he? A beast, an animal, a dog, my love. And he looked at me with such great dark eyes that it locked my heart, and it's been locked forever after with shame. I could not then forgive myself. All these years, the memory of my love and how I failed him, and every Christmas since, not the rest of the year, but every Christmas Eve, his ghost comes back. I see the dog. I hear the beating. I know my failure. Oh, God.
And that is why you are here?
Yes, Father. Isn't it awful? Isn't it terrible?
The priest could not answer, for tears were streaming down his face too, and he found himself unaccountably short of breath.
Will God forgive me, Father?
Yes.
Will you forgive me, Father?
Yes. But let me tell you something now, son. When I was 10, the same things happened. My parents, of course, but then my dog, the love of my life, who ran off, and I hated him for leaving me. And when he came back, I too loved and beat him, and then went back to love until this night. I have told no one. The shame has stayed put all these years. I have confessed all to my priest confessor. But never that. So,
Father?
Lord, dear man, God will forgive us at long last. We've brought it out, dared to say, and I will forgive you. But finally,
The old priest could not go on, for new tears were really pouring down his face now. The stranger on the other side guessed this and very carefully inquired.
Do you want my forgiveness, Father?
The priest nodded silently. Perhaps the other felt the shadow of the nod.
Ah, well, it's given.
And they both sat there for a long moment in the dark, and another ghost moved to stand in the door, then sank to snow and drifted away.
before you go, come. Share a glass of wine.
The great clock in the square across from the church struck midnight.
It's Christmas, Father. The finest Christmas ever, I think.
The finest.
The old priest rose and stepped out. He waited a moment for some stir, some movement from the opposite side of the confessional. There was no sound. Frowning, the priest reached out and opened the confessional door and peered into the cubicle. There was nothing and no one there. His jaw dropped. Snow moved along the back of his neck. He put his hand out to feel the darkness. The place was empty. Turning, he stared at the entry door and hurried over to look out. Snow fell in the last tones of far clocks late sounding the hour. The streets were deserted. Turning again, he saw the tall mirror that stood in the church entry. There was an old man, himself, reflected in the cold glass. Almost without thinking, he raised his hand and made the sign of blessing. The reflection in the mirror did likewise. Then the old priest, wiping his eyes, turned a last time and went to find the wine. Outside, Christmas, like the snow, was everywhere.
We've just heard Bless Me, Father, for I Have Sinned by Ray Bradbury, read by Stephen Berenson, Stephen Thorne, and Rachel Warren. Kurt, we talked about Ray Bradbury being known as a science fiction writer, and there's certainly a lot of magical qualities to this story as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have been wondering, does this really happen to him, or is this all part of his imagination? Right, Janice?
That's what I love about it, is because you wonder, who was that man who was in the confessional? Did he really exist? And then I love the way he makes the snow a supernatural character in the story as well. I just think that there are so many fantastic elements to it. I just love that.
He always writes great stuff for us to read, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a great sentimentality in this story and in other stories, and I think he completely earns it because of his great images, his language, and the characters. And you know, this is such a tiny story, but it's this person at a changing point in his life. Right. It's a completely unexpected changing point. And of course, the holidays are usually times when we, at least that thought crosses our minds, most of our minds, about, you know, what's my life like? How are things going? And is there anything that I need to sort of be examining? And
right. Yeah. There's that's actually a good segue for our next story. I think we'll just move along because I want to get to this next one. Really kind of remarkable. Also set on Christmas Eve in New York City. It's called Two of a Kind. And it was written in 1959 by Sean O'Phelan. O'Phelan was an Irish editor and author of short stories. He was called the Irish Maupassant and the Irish Chekhov. He also wrote novels and biographies. And this is a wonderful piece about past, present, redemption, and the possibility of family.
Two of a Kind by Sean O'Phelan, read by Stephen Berenson, Janice Duclos, and Stephen Thorne, here on Trinity Rep Radio Theater.
Max Cretan was not drunk, but he was melancholy drunk, and he knew it, and he was afraid of it. At first, he had loved being there in the jammed streets, with everybody who passed him carrying parcels wrapped in green or gold, tied with big red ribbons and fixed with berried holly sprigs. He smelled pine and balsam. He pointed out to a cop that when the traffic lights down Park Avenue changed from red to green, the row of white Christmas trees away down the line changed color by reflection. The cop was very grateful to him. The haze of light on the tops of the buildings made a halo over Fifth Avenue. It was all just the way he knew it would be, and he slopping down from Halifax in that damned old tanker. Then, suddenly, he swung his right arm in a wild arc of disgust.
To hell with them. To hell with everybody. Poor Cretan, all alone in New York, on Christmas bloody well Eve, with nobody to talk to and nowhere to go, only back to the bloody old ship. New York, all lit up, everybody, all lit up. Except poor old Creedon.
He began to cry for poor old Creedon. Crying, he reeled through the passing feet. The next thing he knew, he was sitting up at a counter of an 8th Avenue drugstore sucking black coffee with one eye screwed up to look out at the changing traffic lights, chuckling happily over a yarn his mother used to tell him long ago about a place called Ballyroche. He had been there only once, 9 years ago, for her funeral. Beaming into his coffee cup or looking out at the changing traffic lights, he went through his mother's favorite yarn about poor Lily.
Ah, wisha. Poor Lily. I wonder where she is at all now. Is she dead or alive? It all happened through an Italian who used to be going from one farm to another selling painted statues. Bandello, his name was. Handsome black devil of hell. I never in all my born days saw a more handsome devil. Well, one wet, wild, windy October morning, what did she do but creep out of her bed, and we all sound asleep, and go off with him. And from that day to this, not a sight nor sound of her no more than if the earth had swallowed her. Except for the one letter from a priest in America to say she was happily married in Brooklyn, New York.
The yarn always ended up with the count of the years. The last time he heard it, the count had reached 41.
By this year, it would have been 50.
Maxer put down his cup. For the first time in his life, it came to him that the yarn was a true story about a real woman.
Auntie Lily.
For as long as 4 traffic light changes, he fumbled with this fact. Then, like a man hearing a fog signal come again and again from an approaching ship, and at last hearing it close at hand, and then seeing an actual, if dim, shape wrapped in a cocoon of haze, the great idea revealed itself. He lumbered down from his stool and went over to the telephones. His lumpish finger began to trace its way down the gray pages of the phone book among the BANs of Brooklyn. His finger stopped.
Bandello. Mrs. Lily.
He found a dime, tinkled it home, and dialed the number slowly. On the 3rd ring, he heard an old woman's voice. Knowing that she would be very old and might be deaf, he said very loudly, with the extra meticulous enunciation of all drunks,
My name is Matthew Creedon. Only all my friends call me Maxer. I come from Limerick, Ireland. My mother came from the townland of Ballyroche. Are you by any chance my Auntie Lily?
What do you want?
Nothing at all. Only I thought if you are the lady in question that we might have a bit of an old goster. I'm a sailor, docked this morning in the Hudson.
Did somebody tell you to call me?
No, just by a fluke. I happened to look up your name in the directory. I often heard my mother talking about you. I just felt I'd like to talk to somebody. Being Christmas and all to that, and knowing nobody in New York. But if you don't like the idea, then okay, it's fine with me. Don't want to butt in on anybody. Goodbye.
Wait! You're sure nobody sent you?
Inspiration sent me. Father Christmas sent me.
she could take that any way she bloody well liked.
Look, it seems to me I'm butting in, so let's skip it.
No. Why don't you come over and see me?
This minute?
Right away.
Sure, Auntie Lily, I'll be right over. Oh, but listen, I sincerely hope you're not thinking I'm butting in, because if
It
you
was
are...
very nice of you to call me, Matty. Very nice indeed. I'll be glad to see you.
He hung up, grinning. She was just like his mother, the same old Limerick accent, after 50 years, and the same bossy voice. If she was a day, she'd be 70. She'd be tall and thin and handsome, and the real law-de-daw doing the grand lady, and under it all she'd be as soft as mountain moss.
She'll be tidy in the house now like a devil and giving jaw to old Bandello, if he's still alive.
He got lost on the subway, so that when he came up it was dark. He paused to have another black coffee. Then he paused to buy a bottle of Jamaica rum as a present for her. And then he had to walk 5 blocks before he found the house where she lived. She lived in a brownstone house with high steps. 6 other families had rooms in it. The minute he saw her on top of the not brightly lighted landing looking down at him, he saw something he had completely forgotten. She had his mother's height and slimness and her wide mouth, but he had forgotten the pale liquid blue of the eyes, and they stopped him dead on the stairs, his hand tight on the banister. At the sight of her eyes, he heard the soft wind sighing over the level Limerick plain, and his whole body shivered. All over that plain, where a crossroads is an event, where a little sleepy lake is an excitement, where their streams are rivers to them, where their villages are towns, where the resting cows look at you out of owls' eyes, the meadow grass up to their bellies. Those 2 pale eyes looking down at him were bits of the pale albino sky stretched tightly over the Shannon plain. Slowly he climbed up to meet her, she searching his face with her pallid eyes. Then she threw her bony arms around his neck and broke into a low, soft wailing just like that Shannon wind.
Auntie, you're the living image of her.
On the click of a finger, she hauled him by his 2 hands into a room.
You've been drinking. And what delayed you? And I suppose not a scrap of solid food in your stomach since morning.
I'm sorry, Auntie. 'Twas just on account of being all alone, you know, and everybody else making whoopee. Let's have a drink.
He hauled out the peace offering of the rum.
You gotta eat something first. Drinking like that all day. I'm ashamed of you. Sit down, boy. Take off your jacket. I got coffee and cookies and hamburgers and a pie. I always lay in a stock for Christmas. All of the neighbours visit me. Everybody knows that Lily Bandello keeps an open house for Christmas. Nobody is ever going to say Lily Bandello didn't have a welcome for all her friends and relations at Christmas time.
She bustled in and out of the kitchenette, talking back to him without stop. It was a big, dusky room, himself looking at himself out of a tall, mirrored wardrobe piled on top with cardboard boxes. There was a divan in one corner as high as a bed, and he guessed that there was a wash basin behind the old peacock screen. A single bulb hung in the center of the ceiling, in a fluted glass bell with pink frilly edges. The Pope over the bed was Leo XIII. The snowflakes kept touching the bare window panes like kittens' paws trying to get in. When she began on the questions, he wished he had not come.
How's bed?
Bed? My mother? Well, of course, my mother, she's grand. Auntie, never better. For her age, of course, that is. Fine out. Just like yourself, only for the touch of the old rheumatism now and again.
Oh, go on, tell me about all of them. How's Uncle Matty? And how's Sis? When were you down in Ballyroche last? Sure, it's all changed now, I suppose, with electric light and everything up to date.
She came in planking down the plates, an iced Christmas cake, the coffee pot.
Go on, you're telling me nothing.
She stood over him waiting, her eyes wide, her mouth stretched.
My Uncle Matty? Oh, well, of course now, he's not as young as he was, but I saw him there last year. He was looking fine out. I'd be inclined to say he'd be a bit stooped, but in great form for his age, that is.
Eight up, don't mind me. He has a big family now, no doubt.
Yeah, a family, naturally. There's Tom, and there's Kitty. That's my Aunt Kitty. It is Kitty, isn't it? Yeah, my Aunt Kitty. God, I can't remember them all.
She shoved the hamburgers toward him. She made him pour the coffee and tell her if he liked it. She told him he was a bad reporter.
Tell me all about the old place.
He stuffed his mouth to give him time to think.
They have 21 cows. Holsteins, the black and white chaps, and a red barn, and a shelter belt of pines. 'Tis lovely there now to see the wind in the trees, and when the night falls, the way the lighthouse starts winking at you.
What lighthouse?
She glared at him. She drew back from him.
Are you daft? What are you dreaming about? Is it a lighthouse in the middle of the county Limerick?
There is a lighthouse. I saw it in the harbour.
But he suddenly remembered that where he had seen it was in a toy shop on 8th Avenue, with a farm beyond it and a red barn and small cows and a train going round and round it all.
Harbour, Matty? Are you out of your senses?
I saw it with my own 2 eyes.
Her eyes were like marbles. Suddenly she leaned over like a willow, just the way his mother used to lean over.
Oh, I know what you're talking about now. The lighthouse on the Shannon. Oh, Lord save us. How many times did I see it at night from the hill of Ballingarry? But there's no harbour, Matty.
But there's a harbour at Foynes.
Oh, for God's sake, that's miles and miles and miles away. And where could you see any train, day or night, from anywhere at all near Ballyroche?
They argued it hither and over until she suddenly found that the coffee was gone cold and rushed away with the pot to the kitchen. Even there she kept up the argument, calling out that certainly you could see Moneygal Castle and the turn of the River Deal on a fine day, but no train. And then she went on about the stepping stones over the river and came back babbling about Norm Moyle's bull that chased them across the dry river one hot summer's day.
Auntie, why the hell did you never write home?
Not even once.
Not a sight nor a sound of you from the day you left Ballyroche, as my mother used to say. No more than if the earth swallowed you. You're a nice one.
Ate up.
Did you always live here, Auntie Lily?
She sat down and put her face between her palms with her elbows on the table and looked at him.
Here? Well, no. That is to say, no. My husband and me had a house of our very own over in East 58th. He did very well for himself. He was quite a rich man when he died. A big jeweller. When he was killed in an airplane crash 5 years ago, he left me very well off. But sure, I didn't need a house of my own, and I had lots of friends in Brooklyn, so I came to live here.
Fine. What more do you want? That is for a lone woman. No family.
I have my son, but he's married to a Pole. And they'll be over here first thing tomorrow morning to take me off to spend Christmas with them. They have an apartment on Riverside Drive. He is the manager of a big department store, Macy's on Flatbush Avenue. But tell me about Bid's children. You must have lots of brothers and sisters. Where are you going from here? Back to Ireland? To Limerick? To Ballyroche?
Where else would I go? Our next trip, we hit the port of London. I'll be back like an arrow to Ballyroche. They'll be delighted to hear that I met you. They'll be asking me all sorts of questions about you. But tell me more about your son, Auntie. Has he a family?
My son? Well, my son's name is Thomas. His wife's name is Catherine. She's very beautiful. She has means of her own. They're very happy. He's very well off. He's in charge of a big store, Sears Roebuck, on Bedford Avenue. Oh, a fine boy. Fine out, as you say. Fine out. He has 3 children. There's Sissy and Matty. And
when she closed her eyes, he saw how old she was. She rose, and from the bottom drawer of a chest of drawers, she pulled out a photograph album. She laid it in front of him and sat back opposite him.
That is my boy.
Oh, he's just like you.
Oh, he's very like his father.
I've often heard your husband was a most handsome man. Have you a picture of him?
She drew the picture of her son toward her and looked down at it.
Tell me more about Ballyroche.
As he started into a long description of a harvest home, he saw her eyes close again, and her breath came more heavily, and he felt that she was not hearing a word he said. Then, suddenly, her palm slapped down on the picture of the young man, and he knew that she was not heeding him any more than if he weren't there. Her fingers closed on the pasteboard. She shied it wildly across the room and leaned across the table, one white lock down over one eye, her yellow teeth bared.
You spy! You came from them to spy on me!
I came from friendliness.
Or was it for a lookabout? Well, you can go back to Ballyroche and tell him whatever you like. Tell him I'm starving, if that'll please him. The mean, miserable, lousy set that never gave a damn about me from the day I left him. For 40 years, my own sister, your mother, never wrote one
You know
line
damn
to
well
say-
she'd have done anything for you if she only knew where you were. Her heart was stuck in you. The two of you were inside one another's pockets. My God, she was forever talking and talking about you, morning, noon, and night.
I wrote 6 letters.
She never got them.
I registered 2 of them.
Nobody ever got a line from you or about you, only for the one letter from the priest that married you to say you were well and happy.
What he wrote was that I was down and out. I saw the letter. I let him send it. That wop left me flat in this city with my baby. I wrote to everybody, my mother, my father, to bid after she was your mother and had a home of her own. I had to work every day of my life. I worked today. I'll work tomorrow. If you want to know what I do, I clean offices. I worked to bring up my son. And what did he do? Walked out on me with that Pollock of his, and that was the last I saw of him or her or any human being belonging to me until I saw you. Tell them every word of it. They'll love it.
Maxer got up and went over slowly to the bed for his jacket. As he buttoned it, he looked at her, glaring at him across the room. Then he looked away from her at the snowflakes, feeling the window pane, and dying there.
They're all dead. As for Limerick, I haven't been back to Ireland for 8 years. When my mum died, my father got married again. I ran away to sea when I was 16.
He took his cap. When he was at the door, he heard a chair fall, and then she was at his side, holding his arm.
Don't go away, Matty. For God's sake, don't leave me alone with them on Christmas Eve.
Maxer stared at her. Her lips were wavering as if a wind were blowing over them. She had the face of a frightened girl. He threw his cap on the bed and went over and sat down beside it. While he sat there like a big baboon with his hands between his knees looking at the snowflakes, she raced into the kitchen and put on the kettle. It was a long while before she brought in the 2 big glasses of rum punch with orange sliced in them and brown sugar like drowned sand at the base of them. When she held them out to him, he looked first at them and then at her, so timid, so pleading.
Oh, damn ye, I was better off drunk.
She sat down beside him on the bed. He took one of the glasses and touched hers with it.
Here's to poor Lily.
She fondled his free hand.
Oh, lovey, tell me this one thing and tell me true. Did she really and truly talk about me? Or was that all lies too?
She'd be crying rain down when she'd be talking about you. She was always and forever talking about you. She was mad about you.
For years, I couldn't understand it. But when my boy left me for that Pollock, I understood it. I guess Bid had a tough time bringing you all up. And there's no one more hard in all the world than a mother when she's thinking of her own. I'm glad she talked about me. It was better than nothing.
They sat there on the bed, talking and talking. She made more punch, and then more. And in the end, they finished the bottle between them, talking about everybody either of them had known in or within miles of the County Limerick. They fixed to spend Christmas Day together and have Christmas dinner downtown and maybe go to a picture and then come back and talk some more. Every time Maxer comes to New York, he rings her number. He can hardly breathe until he hears her voice.
Hello, Matty.
They go on the town then and have dinner, always at some place with an Irish name or a green neon shamrock above the door. And then they go to a movie or a show. And then they come back to a room to have a drink and talk about his last voyage or the picture postcards he sent her, his latest bits and scraps of news about the Shannon shore. They always get first-class service in restaurants, although Maxer never noticed it until the night a waiter said,
"And what's Mom having?"
At which she gave him a slow wink out of her pale Limerick eyes and a slow lover's smile.
We've been listening to Two of a Kind by Sean O'Phelan with Stephen Berenson, Janice Duclos, and Stephen Thorne. Here on Trinity Rep Radio Theater, recorded live on location at Trinity Rep Theater. Two of a kind, and here we have these two in denial of the reality of their families that never were, and finally coming together. What a moving story.
Isn't it? It's so beautiful because they find family in each other. I love this story. And Janice has been trying to get us to do this on the air for about 3 years now, right?
Well, it's been a while. It just never actually just fit into the programming until now. And, we've always loved the story. And the fact that they found each other, even after getting together and lying to each other for half an hour, I find that so interesting that they get to the heart of it. And that he doesn't turn and leave. He confesses as well that suddenly they're bound together and now they're family. They're family again.
And that's what's so great about these stories and this idea that at the holiday time, at the coldest, loneliest, most desolate time of the year, you can find connection in someone else.
It's
Well, thank you all for a wonderful reading. And thanks to our audience tonight as well.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here.
Trinity Rep Radio Theater is a production of WRNI and Trinity Repertory Company. Janice Duclos, director. Emily Atkinson and Janice Duclos, producers. Kurt Columbus, executive producer. Joe O'Connor, general manager. And Jim Moses, sound engineer. This program featured the H Street Sledding Record, copyright 1984 by Ron Carlson, used by permission of Branton Hutchman Literary Agents. Bless Me, Father, for I Have Sinned, copyright 1984 by Ray Bradbury, recorded with the permission of Don Congdon Associates. And Two of a Kind from the Collected Stories of Sean O'Phelan, copyright 1959-1961, used by permission of Curtis Brown Incorporated. You can hear this program again and find archived programs at wrni.org. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bob C.